For what will be our second installment of what is required to build a Continental Tire Porsche, we've come down to the cage builder where the car goes after it leaves the shop and the interior's been removed. And we wanted to spend a little bit of time kind of videoing the car so that people could see the parts that are laid out for a cage before it becomes a roll cage. One of the interesting things about cage builders is they are kind of like artists. You know, when you find a good one, you try to latch onto them because the really good ones are few and far between. And we've got a local guy here at Stoke Metal Works who does work for a lot of the Grand-Am teams and SCCA teams in the Ormond and Daytona area, and you know, he's done a lot of great work for our cars. You'll see the Cayman has a very, very, very bare basic cage. It'll get a diagonal bar for additional support, but there's not a lot to it because it is a car that has to weigh 2,700 pounds. And when we strip them down, we are a little bit nervous about being able to get down to there, and you can get down there without having to hack up the car, but you really do have to take out everything that you can, and you do have to use as little roll bar tubing as possible to try and achieve that goal. You got a view here from the passenger side, which the whole thing begins as a box and gets welded into the car at the base. And when it comes to building a race car like this, like a street stock car, a lot of people look immediately at the cage because of safety concerns. So it's the first thing anybody really looks at in a race car, to look at welds and see how elaborate it is. Are there a lot of bars? You know, a lot of people see this in the event of a rollover as the single most important thing holding you in there. The cage is, you know, is the infrastructure for your safety system. These are the rear anchor points for the roll cage. In Grand-Am Continental Tire, the series does not let us go further back than the shock towers to try and make additional points of rigidity. So what we do is we lay plates in on the factory sheet metal in an effort to expand the base mounting points of the cage for the rear sections to, you know, to maintain rigidity and establish a kind of a safety box in the car. A lot of teams will spend a fair amount of time putting additional sheet metal here between the shock towers to increase chassis rigidity. The car such as the Cayman is nice to start with because the factory puts this bulkhead sheet metal here, which is the start of the engine bay, but it allows us to have a really good starting point to start a roll hoop behind the driver, which is pretty rigid from the factory. The painter, once he gets this thing, will sand and scuff all of this stuff and spray it down in the paint booth in about 4 or 5 days. It will, it's pretty awesome to see what it looks like before and after. From the moment we drop it off, from when I can pick it up from the painter, I think it's probably, to be safe, 3 weeks. You have to budget because there are always hiccups and snafus. You know, that's adding a couple days to be safe, but in 3 weeks you can get a car back caged and painted, and a lot of that is paint prep. It's an additional week for paint prep alone. So, you know, a week for the cage and a week here and there for transport. This was my street car. I was lucky enough to be able to drive it to work every day. There was a time when we didn't have any kind of spare inventory on gearboxes and engines, and the reason this is a 1-year-old car with 30,000 miles on it is because I drove it to the first 6 Grand-Am races last year as our donor parts car. We're going to continue to go out and look for crashed cars or cars that are flooded or something, because if the expense of tearing apart a new street car, you know, can be reduced if you start with something that's something that nobody else wants maybe. But you know, for the most part, this will conclude the cage part, and probably the next time you see this car, it will be freshly painted and it will be ready to be reassembled, and it'll look less like a theft recovery and a little bit more like, you know, a race car that wants to be a race car.